My nephew looked at me and saw a fragile, senile old woman ripe for the picking. He thought he could gaslight me, steal my vineyard, and pay off his gambling debts with my legacy. But he made one fatal mistake. He forgot that before I was a widow, I was a forensic accountant who put billionaires in prison. He thought he was playing me, but I was about to audit his entire life. The rain had not stopped for 3 days, which felt appropriate considering the circumstances. It felt like the Oregon sky was weeping right alongside me as we lowered Henry into the ground. The soil was dark and heavy, and the smell of wet earth mixed with the scent of the white lilies that were piled high on the mahogany casket. I stood there, clutching my black umbrella, feeling the damp cold settle into my bones. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in 40 years, I was truly alone. Or at least I thought I was alone until I heard the crunch of gravel on the driveway behind the family plot. A sleek black car pulled up, looking entirely out of place against the backdrop of our rustic vineyard, and out stepped a young man in a suit that cost more than my first car. It was Silas, my nephew. I had not seen Silas in 5 years, not since he asked Henry for a loan to start a nightclub in Miami, and Henry had politely shown him the door. Silas had been furious then, screaming that we were hoarding our wealth, but now as he walked toward me across the wet grass, his face was a mask of solemn grief. Walking beside him was a young woman I had never met. She was holding a large umbrella over Silas rather than herself, and she was struggling to walk in the mud because she was wearing stilettos. She looked at the gravestone like she was bored waiting for a bus, but when she saw me looking, she quickly arranged her face into a pout of sympathy. This, I assumed, was Bella. Silas approached me with his arms wide open. "Aunt Martha," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry." He pulled me into a hug that lasted a few seconds too long. His cologne was overpowering, a mix of musk and something sharp like expensive gin. He smelled like the city. He smelled like trouble. I thanked him quietly, pulling away. I asked him what he was doing here all the way from Florida. He told me that family supports family. He said he couldn't let me face this tragedy alone. He said he cleared his schedule and canceled important meetings just to be here for me. It sounded rehearsed like a line from a bad movie, but I was too tired to argue. The grief was a heavy fog in my brain, and part of me just wanted to go inside and drink a cup of hot tea and sleep for a week. "Let us take you back to the house," Bella said. Her voice was high and brittle. "You shouldn't be standing out here in the damp. It is bad for your joints." I stiffened slightly. My joints were perfectly fine. I did yoga every morning, and I could still walk the perimeter of the vineyard without losing my breath. But to them, I was just a fragile old relic. I nodded and let them guide me to their car, even though my own truck was parked right there. I felt like a prisoner being escorted away. When we arrived back at the farmhouse, the silence of the empty rooms hit me harder than the rain. Henry used to fill this house. His laughter, his pipe smoke, the sound of his boots on the hardwood floors. Now it was just quiet. Silas walked in first. He didn't take off his shoes. He walked right onto the Persian rug in the foyer, leaving muddy footprints. "Nice place," Silas said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the ceiling beams. He was looking at the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. He was looking at the view of the valley through the bay window. I spent 40 years catching people who tried to hide money and cook books, so I know what it looks like when someone is appraising an asset. Silas wasn't looking at a home full of memories. He was looking at square footage. He was calculating the resale value. I offered to make tea, but Bella insisted she would do it. "You sit down, Martha," she said, pushing me gently toward the armchair. You just rest. I will take care of everything." I sat down, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to watch them. I watched Silas walk to the fireplace. He ran his hand along the mantelpiece. He tapped the wall as if checking for dry rot. He went to the window and stared out at the vines which were dormant for the winter. "This land goes all the way to the river, right?" Silas asked without turning around. I told him it did. I told him it was 50 acres of prime Pinot Noir grapes. He nodded slowly. "That is a lot of upkeep for one person, Aunt Martha. A lot of work. You must be overwhelmed." I told him I had a manager who handled the farming and I handled the books. I told him I was managing just fine. He turned around then and gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course you are," he said soothingly. "But you shouldn't have to. You have earned a rest." Just then, I heard a heavy thud on the front porch. I looked out the window and saw the driver of the black car unloading luggage. It wasn't just an overnight bag. There were 4 massive suitcases. Hard-shell designer luggage. The kind you pack when you are moving to Europe, not visiting a grieving aunt for the weekend. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck that had nothing to do with the drafty window. They weren't here to comfort me. They had brought enough clothes to stay for a month. Maybe longer. Silas saw me looking at the bags. "Oh, I hope you don't mind," he said casually. "We thought we would stay for a little while, just until you get back on your feet. We can't leave you alone in this big old house. It isn't safe." He said the word safe with a strange inflection, as if the danger was the house itself and not the wolf standing in my living room wearing Italian loafers. I looked at Silas, and then I looked at Bella, who was rummaging through my kitchen cupboards loudly rearranging mugs because she apparently didn't like where I kept them. I realized then that my quiet life of retirement was over. Henry was gone, and the sharks had smelled blood in the water. I took a sip of the tea Bella handed me. It was lukewarm and too sweet. I smiled a small, tight smile. "Thank you, Silas," I said. "It is very generous of you to give up your life to be here." I gripped the arm of the chair. I was a forensic accountant. I had brought down CEOs who thought they were smarter than the law. I had found hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands and exposed embezzlement schemes that were buried under mountains of paper. Silas thought he was dealing with a sweet, confused old lady. He had no idea he had just walked into the lion's den. I have always been awake before the sun. It is a habit from my years working cases that required starting at 4 in the morning to catch international markets opening or to sift through boxes of evidence before the defense attorneys arrived. Retirement had not broken the habit, and neither had grief. At 5 in the morning, the house was usually silent, a heavy blanket of peace that I cherished. But this morning, the air felt different. It felt crowded. I moved quietly through the hallway, wearing my thick wool socks. The floorboards in this house were over 100 years old, and they groaned if you didn't know exactly where to step. I knew every safe spot. I knew that the third plank from the kitchen door squeaked like a mouse, and the step at the bottom of the stairs cracked like a pistol shot. I navigated them with the muscle memory of 40 years. I went into the kitchen and started the coffee. The smell of dark roast beans usually comforted me, but today it just made me alert. I needed to clear my head. I pulled a bag of flour from the pantry to start kneading dough for bread. The rhythmic motion of pushing and folding the dough was my form of meditation. Push and fold, push and fold. It was the only way I could stop thinking about Henry's empty chair at the head of the table. The house was still dark, but I didn't turn on the lights. I preferred the gray-blue light of the pre-dawn entering through the east window. It was then that I heard it. A low mumble. a voice that was too agitated to be someone talking in their sleep. It was coming from the library, Henry's study. I wiped the flour from my hands and walked softly toward the hallway. The library door was cracked open just an inch. A sliver of yellow light spilled out onto the rug. I didn't walk up to the door. Instead, I stopped at the credenza about 5 feet away. Henry and I called this spot the Whispering Gallery because of a quirk in the architecture. If you stood right there, the acoustics of the old house carried sound from the library as clearly as if you were standing inside the room. It was Silas. His voice was tight and hushed, a desperate whisper that sounded nothing like the confident, grieving nephew he had played yesterday. "I am telling you, Tony, I am on top of it," he hissed. There was a pause. "No, do not send anyone to the apartment. I am not there. I am in Oregon." I held my breath. My heart started to hammer a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "Listen to me," Silas continued, his voice rising in frustration before dropping back down. "The liquidity event is happening. I just need 30 days, maybe less. She is old Tony. She is completely out of it. She doesn't even know what year it is half the time." I felt a cold flash of anger. I knew exactly what year it was. I knew the date, the time, and the current interest rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage, but I stayed frozen. "We are talking about 50 acres of premium viticultural land," Silas said, "plus the house, the inventory. It is millions, Tony. Millions. I will have the power of attorney by the end of the week. I just have to get her to sign the papers. She trusts me. She thinks I am here to save her." I leaned back against the wall. The pieces clicked together in my mind with the satisfying snap of a ledger balancing out. This wasn't a visit. This was a raid. Silas wasn't here to comfort a widow. He was here to liquidate an asset. And I was the asset. I heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor inside the library. He was moving. I turned and moved swiftly back to the kitchen, my socked feet silent on the wood. I reached the counter just as I heard the library door open fully. I grabbed the wooden spoon and started aggressively stirring the empty bowl of dough, making sure I looked busy and oblivious. Silas shuffled into the kitchen a moment later. He was wearing silk pajamas that probably cost more than my tractor. His hair was messy and he had dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who was being hunted. When he saw me, he jumped slightly. "Jesus, Martha," he said, clutching his chest. "You scared me. What are you doing up so early?" I turned to him and gave him my best vacant grandmotherly smile. The one I used to give to salesmen before I slammed the door in their faces. "Oh, just baking, dear," I said, my voice light and airy. I couldn't sleep. The house feels so big without Henry. I forget what time it is sometimes. Is it morning already? Silas relaxed. His shoulders dropped. He walked over to the coffee pot and poured himself a mug, his hand shaking slightly. "Yeah, Aunt Martha, it is morning," he said, taking a long sip. "Don't worry about the time. You just relax. I am going to take care of everything for you. You won't have to worry about a thing." I watched him drink my coffee in my kitchen, plotting to sell my home to pay off a gambling debt named Tony. "That is so sweet of you, Silas," I said, turning back to my dough. "I don't know what I would do without you." I pounded the dough hard, imagining it was his head. The game had started. He thought he was the player, but he didn't realize he had just dealt cards to the best bluffer in the state. By the third day, the invasion was in full swing. It started with small things that were easy to dismiss if you were not paying attention, but I pay attention for a living. I walked into the living room after tending to the chickens and stopped dead in my tracks. The room looked wrong. It felt tilted. It took me a moment to realize that the furniture had been shifted just a few inches to the left. The rug was realigned. The photographs on the mantelpiece had been reordered so that the picture of Henry and me on our wedding day was pushed to the back behind a vase of dried flowers. Bella was standing in the center of the room with a tape measure in her hand, looking at the walls with a critical squint. She did not hear me come in. She was muttering to herself about open concepts and natural light. When she finally saw me, she didn't apologize. She just smiled that tight plastic smile and told me she was just trying to help me declutter. She said the feng shui in the house was blocking my energy and making me tired. I wasn't tired until they arrived, but I didn't say that. I just nodded and thanked her for her concern. I watched as she pointed to Henry's old leather recliner. The leather was cracked and worn in the shape of his body, and it was the most comfortable seat in the house. Bella wrinkled her nose and said it was an eyesore. She said it smelled like old tobacco and dust, and suggested we put it in the barn, or better yet, leave it out for the trash collection. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like a physical blow. That chair was where Henry sat every evening to read the paper. It was where he held me when we got the news about his diagnosis. To throw it away felt like erasing him completely, but I knew if I fought back, they would see my strength. So I lowered my eyes and mumbled that I suppose she was right. I told her I would think about it. Later that afternoon, the real games began. I was looking for my reading glasses. I always kept them on the small oak table by the entryway. I had put them there specifically before I went out to check the mail. When I came back, they were gone. I searched the table. I checked my pockets. I looked on the floor, thinking maybe I had knocked them over. Silas walked in, eating an apple from my fruit bowl. He asked me what I was looking for, and his voice was dripping with exaggerated patience. I told him I couldn't find my glasses. He chuckled softly and shook his head. "Oh, Aunt Martha," he said, "you are wearing them." I reached up to my face. I was not wearing them. I told him I was not wearing them. He frowned and walked over to the pantry. He opened the door and pointed to the shelf next to the dog food. "They are right here, Martha," he said. "Why did you put your glasses in the pantry?" I stared at the glasses sitting on the shelf. I knew for a fact I had not gone into the pantry. I had not opened that door all day. But Silas looked at me with such pity in his eyes. He put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed it gently. "You have been so forgetful lately," he said softly. "Yesterday, you forgot where you put your keys. Today, it is the glasses. It is understandable with all the stress you are under, but we need to keep an eye on this. We don't want you hurting yourself." I looked at him, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was a classic technique. It was textbook manipulation. If you make someone doubt their own memory, they become dependent on you. They start to trust your reality over their own. He was trying to build a case for incompetence. He wanted to be able to tell a judge or a doctor that his poor aunt couldn't even keep track of her own glasses. So how could she possibly manage a vineyard? I took the glasses from him. My hands were trembling, and I let them tremble. I let my lower lip quiver just a little. "Oh my goodness," I whispered. "I don't remember doing that. That is so strange. I must be more tired than I thought." Silas smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who sees the prey limping. "Exactly," he said. "That is why Bella and I are here, to handle the details so you don't have to worry. Why don't you go lie down for a bit? Take a nap. We will make dinner." I nodded obediently and shuffled toward the stairs, holding the banister like an invalid. I walked up the steps slowly, stopping halfway to catch my breath just for show. But as soon as I reached the landing and turned the corner out of their sight, I straightened my back. I walked silently to my bedroom and locked the door. I didn't lie down. I went to my desk and pulled out a fresh notebook. I wrote down the date and the time. I wrote down: Incident 1, furniture moved. Incident 2, glasses moved to pantry. They thought they were driving me crazy. They thought they were dismantling my mind piece by piece. But all they were doing was giving me evidence. I wasn't losing my mind. I was building a case file, and Silas was going to be the subject of the most thorough audit of his life. The opportunity arrived at 2 p.m. on Thursday. Silas and Bella announced they were going out to visit some of the neighboring wineries. They claimed it was for market research, but I knew better. They just wanted to drink expensive wine on someone else's dime and complain about the Oregon drizzle. Silas made a big show of checking on me before they left. He made sure I had my tea and my knitting and the remote control for the television. He treated me like a toddler who needed to be settled in a playpen. I smiled and thanked him and promised I would stay right there in my chair until they returned. I waited until I heard the heavy crunch of gravel fade into the distance. I waited another full minute just to be sure they hadn't forgotten a phone or a wallet. Then I stood up. I folded my knitting neatly and placed it on the side table. My hands, which had been trembling for show all morning, became steady as rocks. I walked to the kitchen and drank a glass of cold water to sharpen my senses. Then I headed straight for the guest bedroom. The room smelled of Silas. It was that same musk and gin smell mixed with the scent of stale takeout food. The bed was unmade. Clothes were strewn across the floor in piles of expensive fabric. It was chaos. But my eyes went straight to the desk by the window. Silas's laptop was sitting there. It was a sleek silver machine, thin as a blade. It was closed, but I could see the tiny pulsing light on the side, indicating it was only asleep. I pulled out the chair and sat down. My heart was beating a little faster, but it wasn't fear. It was the thrill of the hunt. It was the same feeling I used to get when a subpoenaed box of documents arrived at my office, and I knew the smoking gun was buried somewhere inside. I opened the lid. The screen flared to life, demanding a password. I stared at the blank white box. Silas was arrogant. He was the kind of man who thought he was the smartest person in the room, and that usually made people lazy with their security. He wouldn't use a random string of characters. He would use something that fed his ego. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried the name of his failed nightclub in Miami. Incorrect. Then I paused and looked around the room. On the nightstand was a framed photo he had brought with him. It wasn't a picture of family. It was a picture of him shaking hands with a minor celebrity at a golf tournament. He was obsessed with status. I typed in the word empire. The screen shook. Incorrect. I closed my eyes and thought back to the phone call I had overheard. He had mentioned the liquidity event. He was desperate. He was focused on the money. I typed in Galloway 1. The screen unlocked. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He was so predictable. He viewed my name, my family name, not as a legacy, but as a password to his future wealth. I didn't waste time looking at his browser history or his photos. I went straight to the file manager. I was looking for spreadsheets. I was looking for PDFs. I was looking for the numbers because numbers do not lie. People lie. They lie to their spouses and their families and the IRS, but they never lie to their own ledgers. I found a folder labeled Finances. I opened it, and what I saw made my stomach turn. It wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. Silas wasn't just in debt. He was drowning. There were Excel sheets tracking loans from 3 different banks and several private lenders with names that sounded less like institutions and more like loan sharks. One of them was simply labeled Tony. The interest rates were predatory. The balances were in the red, and the numbers were climbing every single day. He owed nearly $400,000, and he had zero income. I scrolled down further and found a subfolder named The Oasis. It was the real estate project he had bragged about years ago. The documents showed it had stalled. The contractors had walked off the job. There were liens against the property. He had leveraged everything he had and lost it all. Then I found the document that made my blood run cold. It was a PDF labeled Letter of Intent, Vanguard Properties. I opened it. It was a draft agreement for the sale of the Galloway Vineyard. The date was from 2 weeks ago, before Henry had even been buried. I read the terms. Silas was offering to sell the entire 50 acres, including the house and the barns, for a price that was insulting. It was half of what the land was worth, but it was a quick sale, a cash offer. He was desperate for speed, not value. But the worst part was the clause on page 3. It was under the section titled Site Clearing. The agreement stated that the buyer intended to raze all existing structures to the ground to make way for a luxury condo development. Razing all existing structures. That meant my house. The house Henry built with his own hands. The house where we raised our daughter. The porch where we sat and watched the sunset for 40 years. Silas wasn't just selling the land. He was signing a death warrant for my entire life. He was going to let them bulldoze my memories to pay off a gambling debt. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I brushed it away angrily. I didn't have time for sadness. I needed evidence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small USB drive I had swiped from my old office supplies. I plugged it into the side of the laptop. I copied the finances folder and the letter of intent. The progress bar crawled across the screen. I tapped my fingers on the desk, counting the seconds. 90%. 95%. Done. I pulled the drive out and shoved it deep into my pocket. I closed the folder. I closed the laptop. I looked around the room. I checked the position of the chair. I made sure it was angled exactly as it had been. I brushed the surface of the desk with my sleeve to remove any fingerprints. I stood up and walked to the door. I paused and listened. The house was silent. I walked back to the living room and sat down in my chair. I picked up my knitting. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm of war drums. 10 minutes later, I heard the car return. The door slammed. I heard Bella laughing that high, shrill laugh. I started knitting. Knit 1 purl 2, knit 1 purl 2. Silas walked in a moment later. His cheeks were flushed with wine. "Hey, Aunt Martha," he boomed. "Did you have a nice nap?" I looked up at him over the top of my glasses. I looked at the man who was planning to bulldoze my home. "I slept like a baby, Silas," I said. "Just like a baby." I waited until the house was dark. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, and the heavy silence of the countryside settled over the roof. I could hear the faint sound of Silas snoring from the guest room upstairs, a rhythmic grunting that vibrated through the floorboards. Bella was asleep too, probably dreaming of how she would redecorate my living room with beige furniture and modern art. I pulled on my heavy coat and slipped into my rubber boots. I didn't take a flashlight because I didn't need one. I knew the path to the main barn by heart. The rain had turned to a light mist, and the air was crisp and cold, smelling of wet pine needles and wood smoke. The main barn was a cathedral of shadows. It smelled of old hay and diesel fuel from the tractor. Silas had walked through here yesterday. He had looked at the tractors and the tools with a sneer. He had called it a junk pile. He saw a dusty old shed that needed to be torn down to make room for a swimming pool or a tennis court. But Silas was a man who only looked at the surface of things. He never bothered to look underneath. I walked to the back of the barn, past the rows of empty barrels and the fermentation tanks. In the far corner, under a stack of old burlap sacks, there was a wooden pallet. To anyone else, it looked like trash. To me, it was the door to the vault. I dragged the pallet aside. My muscles protested, but the adrenaline gave me strength. Underneath was a steel handle set flush into the concrete floor. I pulled it up, and the heavy trapdoor groaned on its hinges. A musty scent drifted up. It wasn't a bad smell. It was the smell of earth and time and magic. I climbed down the narrow wooden ladder into the subcellar. I pulled the string for the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The yellow light flickered and then steadied, illuminating the rows of wooden racks that lined the stone walls. This was Henry's pride and joy. This was the legacy Silas was too stupid to know existed. There were 3,000 bottles down here. But the ones that mattered were in the section against the back wall. The bottles were covered in a thick layer of gray dust, like velvet. The labels were handwritten in Henry's looping script. Pinot Noir, 1972. It was the first year we produced wine. The weather that year had been perfect. A long, hot summer followed by a cool, dry autumn. The grapes had been small and concentrated, bursting with flavor. We had bottled it, and Henry had said we should save it. He said it was our insurance policy. I picked up one of the bottles and wiped the dust away with my thumb. The dark glass gleamed. I knew the current market value. A collector in San Francisco had offered us $600 a bottle 5 years ago. Now with Henry gone and the vineyard's future uncertain, the price would be double that. Maybe triple. There was over $2 million worth of wine sitting in this damp little room. I held the bottle to my chest. This was my retirement. This was the money for my long-term care. This was the donation I wanted to leave to the local library. And Silas wanted to bring in bulldozers. I imagined the heavy yellow machines tearing through the barn. I imagined the weight of the tracks crushing the concrete floor. I imagined the bottles shattering, the red wine soaking into the dirt, like blood mixed with the broken glass. The thought made me feel physically ill. If Silas found this room, he wouldn't see history. He wouldn't see art. He would see quick cash. He would sell it all to a bulk distributor for pennies just to pay off Tony and the sharks in Miami. Or worse, he would drink it. The thought of him and Bella popping the corks of Henry's masterpiece to wash down a takeout pizza made my hands shake with rage. I carefully placed the bottle back on the rack. I couldn't leave it here. It wasn't safe. The barn wasn't safe. The house wasn't safe. I needed to move it, but I couldn't move 3,000 bottles by myself, not without them noticing. I needed help, and I needed a place to hide 2 tons of glass. I thought about the old root cellar on the neighboring property. The Miller farm. Old man Miller had passed away last year, and his son lived in the city and rarely visited. I had the key to the gate because I fed the barn cats. It was dry and cool and underground. It was perfect. I would have to do it at night. Bottle by bottle. Box by box. It would take me weeks. My back would ache and my hands would blister, but I didn't care. I would act the part of the frail, old woman during the day. I would nap and knit and pretend to lose my glasses. But at night, while they slept, the sleep of the wicked, I would be working. I looked at the rows of bottles one last time before I pulled the light string. "Don't worry, Henry," I whispered into the darkness. "I won't let them have a single drop." I climbed back up the ladder and lowered the trap door. I dragged the pallet back into place, covering the seams. I scattered some loose hay over the top to hide the drag marks. When I walked back to the house, the mist had turned into a steady rain again. I slipped into the back door and took off my boots. I walked past the guest room door and paused. Silas let out a loud snort in his sleep. Sleep tight, nephew, I thought. Enjoy your dreams of condos and cash. Because while you are dreaming, I am robbing you blind of the treasure you didn't even know you had. The smell hit me the moment I opened the bedroom door. It was the rich, heavy scent of roasting meat mixed with garlic and rosemary. It was a smell that should have been comforting, but tonight it felt like an intrusion because I wasn't the one cooking. I walked down the stairs, my hand sliding along the polished wood of the banister. I could hear voices drifting from the dining room. Loud booming laughter. The clinking of crystal glasses. It sounded like a celebration. I hadn't been invited. I walked into the hallway and saw them. Silas sat at the head of the table, Henry's chair. He was wearing a fresh suit, and his face was flushed with excitement. Bella was next to him, wearing a black dress that was far too short for a dinner in the country. And across from them sat two men I had never seen before. They were large men. Not in the way Henry was large with muscle from working the fields, but large in the way of men who ate expensive lunches and sat in leather chairs all day. One had slicked back gray hair and a nose that looked like it had been broken once. The other was younger, with a nervous energy and a constant habit of checking his gold watch. Silas looked up and saw me. For a split second, he looked annoyed, like a child caught throwing a party while the parents were away. Then he plastered on that fake smile. "Oh, Aunt Martha," he called out. "Come in, come in." I didn't think you were hungry, so we went ahead and started. "Gentlemen, this is my aunt. The current owner." He said current owner like it was a temporary medical condition that would soon clear up. The two men didn't stand up. They just nodded at me over their wine glasses. "This is Mr. Kincaid and Mr. Thorne," Silas said, gesturing with a fork. "They are developers. Visionaries, really. They are going to help us turn this place into something spectacular." Mr. Kincaid, the one with the broken nose, looked me up and down. "Nice place you got here, Mrs. Galloway," he said. "Good bones. A bit dated, though. Needs a bulldozer to really open up the potential." He laughed at his own joke. Silas laughed too. Bella giggled. I didn't laugh. I just smiled that vacant smile I had perfected over the last week. "Oh, I suppose you are right," I said, my voice trembling just enough. "It is a lot of work for an old woman." Silas snapped his fingers. "Martha, why don't you get us some more wine? The bottle is empty. Go down to the cellar and grab something good. Something really special. These gentlemen appreciate quality." He was treating me like a waitress in my own home. I nodded obediently. "Of course, Silas," I said. "Anything for your guests." I walked into the kitchen. My hands were not shaking now. I walked past the pantry door where the cellar entrance was, but I didn't open it. I wasn't going to waste a bottle of Henry's 1972 Reserve on these vultures. On the counter sat a bottle of cooking wine I used for stews. It was a cheap, sugary red blend from the supermarket that cost $4 a bottle. It tasted like grape juice mixed with rubbing alcohol. I opened it and poured the dark purple liquid into one of my best crystal decanters. I swirled it around, letting it breathe. It looked expensive. It looked rich. I carried the decanter back into the dining room. I moved slowly, shuffling my feet. I poured a generous amount into Mr. Kincaid's glass, then Mr. Thorne's. Finally, I filled Silas's glass. Silas picked it up and swirled it aggressively, trying to look like a connoisseur. He stuck his nose in the glass and inhaled deeply. He said, closing his eyes. "Now that is the good stuff. You can really smell the oak." Mr. Kincaid took a large gulp. He smacked his lips. "Incredible," he said. "Smooth. Very smooth. You can't buy this in a store." I stood by the sideboard, my hands folded in front of me, watching them. I watched them drink swill and praise it as if it were nectar from the gods. It was the confirmation I needed. These men knew nothing about wine. They knew nothing about land. They were frauds. They went back to their conversation, ignoring me completely. "So the timeline is tight," Kincaid said, leaning in. "We need to break ground by April. That means the demolition crew needs to be here in March. We flatten the house first, then the barns. We can level the hill to put in the clubhouse." Bella chimed in. "And the trees. Those old oak trees block the view. We should cut them down." Silas nodded eagerly. "Consider it done. Martha is signing the papers this week. It is just a formality." I listened to them plan the destruction of my world. I listened to them talk about tearing down the oak tree Henry and I planted on our 10th anniversary. I listened to them discuss paving over the garden where I grew my tomatoes. They thought I was just a senile old woman staring into space. They didn't know I was memorizing every word. I was noting the name of their company, Kincaid and Thorne Development. I was noting the fact that they mentioned they hadn't secured the county permits yet because they wanted to bribe the zoning commissioner. Silas raised his glass. "To the future," he shouted. "To the Galloway estate and spa." They all clinked their glasses. "To the future," they chorused. I watched them drink the cheap cooking wine. "To the future," I whispered to myself. "But not your future." I turned and walked back into the kitchen, leaving them to their celebration. I had heard enough. They were arrogant and they were sloppy. They thought the battle was already won. I picked up the empty bottle of cheap wine and dropped it into the recycling bin. It made a loud clank, but nobody in the dining room heard it over the sound of their own greed. I washed my hands in the sink, scrubbing them hard, as if I could wash away the stain of their presence. Tomorrow, I would make a phone call. Tomorrow, the counterattack would begin. The morning sun was bright and unforgiving, which was exactly how I wanted it. I walked into the kitchen at 7 o'clock sharp, making sure to let the screen door slam shut behind me. Silas was sitting at the table wearing sunglasses indoors. He was clutching a mug of black coffee with both hands, and his skin had a distinct greenish tint. The cheap, sugary wine from the night before had done its work perfectly. He looked like death warmed over. "Good morning, Silas." I chirped, my voice deliberately loud and cheerful. "It is a beautiful day. The fresh air is just wonderful." Silas winced and pressed a hand to his temple. "Please, Aunt Martha," he groaned. "Keep it down. I have a migraine." It must have been the barometric pressure. I fought the urge to laugh. It wasn't the pressure, Silas. It was the tannins and the preservatives in the $4 swill you drank like water. But I just nodded sympathetically and started banging pots and pans to make oatmeal. "I need to run into town," I said, dropping a metal spoon onto the counter with a loud clatter. "My arthritis is acting up and I need to pick up my prescription at the pharmacy. Also, I think I need to see the optometrist. My eyes are getting worse, just like you said." Silas waved a hand dismissively without looking up. "Yeah, fine, go. Just be back by noon. The lawyer is coming at 1 to sign the papers." I drove my old truck down the winding gravel road. As soon as I was out of sight of the house, my posture changed. I sat up straight. I checked the rearview mirror to make sure I wasn't being followed. I drove past the pharmacy and went straight to the brick building on Main Street that housed the law offices of Henderson and Associates. Robert Henderson had been Henry's lawyer for 30 years. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. He wore suspenders and smoked cigars that made his office smell like a humidor. But he was the sharpest legal mind in the county. I walked past his receptionist, who looked surprised to see me, and went straight into his office. Robert was reading a file, but he looked up when I closed the door and locked it. "Martha," he said, taking off his glasses. "To what do I owe the pleasure? You look determined." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and placed it on his desk. Then I pulled out the notebook where I had recorded every single lie Silas had told me over the last week. "We have a problem, Robert," I said. "My nephew is trying to steal the vineyard. He is planning to sell it to developers to pay off a gambling debt. He is trying to declare me incompetent to get power of attorney." Robert's face darkened. He picked up the drive. "What is on this?" "Proof," I said. We spent the next hour going over the documents I had stolen from Silas's laptop. Robert's face went from pale to red to a shade of purple that looked dangerous. He slammed his fist on the desk. "This is fraud, Martha," he growled. "This is conspiracy. We can have him arrested today. I will call the sheriff." "No," I said sharply. "Not yet. If we arrest him now, the creditors might still try to put a lien on the property. And honestly, Robert, I want him to suffer. I want him to think he has won, and then I want to watch the floor drop out from under him." Robert looked at me with a new respect. He sat back in his chair. "So, what is the plan?" "We are going to restructure the estate," I said. "I want to create a revocable living trust. I want to move the deed of the house and the land into the trust immediately." Robert nodded, grabbing a yellow legal pad. "Standard procedure." "And who is the trustee?" "I am," I said. "But here's the trap. We are going to add a clause. A fiduciary solvency clause." I explained exactly what I wanted. The clause would state that in the event of my incapacitation or death, the successor trustee, which Silas assumed would be him, must prove they are financially solvent. They must have a credit score above 700 outstanding civil judgments. If they fail this test, they are automatically disqualified, and control passes to a court-appointed third party. Silas had a credit score that was probably in the single digits, and he owed half of Miami money. He would never pass. And one more thing I added. The competency clause. Silas wants me to sign a paper saying I am of sound mind to give him power. We will give him a paper that says that. But the fine print will say that the power of attorney is only valid after 2 independent doctors certify that I am unfit. Not him. Doctors. Robert started typing. His fingers flew across the keyboard. "It is a poison pill," he said, grinning around his unlit cigar. He will sign it thinking it hands him the keys to the kingdom, but he is actually locking himself out. Exactly, I said. We finished the paperwork at 11:30. I signed the deed transfer right there, moving the property into the Martha Galloway Heritage Trust. Technically, as of this moment, I didn't own the land anymore. The trust did, and Silas wasn't in the trust. I took the original physical deed to the house, the one with the gold seal from 1970, and I handed it to Robert. "Put this in your safe," I said. "Silas is tearing the house apart looking for it." "Consider it done," Robert said. He walked me to the door. "You are a dangerous woman, Martha." I smiled, and for the first time in a week, it was a real smile. "I am just protecting what is mine, Robert." I drove back to the vineyard feeling lighter than air. I stopped at the pharmacy just to buy a bottle of aspirin to keep my cover story intact. When I pulled into the driveway, Silas was standing on the porch, checking his watch. He looked impatient and greedy. "You are late," he snapped as I climbed out of the truck. "The notary is almost here." I hobbled up the steps, clutching my pharmacy bag. "I am sorry, Silas," I said, making my voice quiver. "I got confused at the stop sign. There were so many cars." He rolled his eyes and took my arm, pulling me into the house. Just get inside. It is time to sign the papers. I let him lead me in. I was walking into the lion's den, but this time, the lion didn't know that the lamb had brought a loaded gun. The dining room table was covered in paper. It looked less like a home and more like a corporate boardroom. Silas sat at the head of the table, tapping a gold pin against the wood. Next to him sat a man I didn't know. He was introduced as Mr. Finch, a notary public, but he wore a suit that was too shiny, and he had the shifty eyes of a man who made his living witnessing things he shouldn't. Bella was hovering in the doorway, drinking a green smoothie and looking at her phone. She was already mentally spending the money she thought was coming. "Sit down," Aunt Martha Silas said, pulling out a chair. "We need to get this done. Mr. Finch charges by the hour." I sat down slowly, lowering myself into the chair with a heavy sigh. I looked at the stack of documents. There were easily 50 pages. The top page was titled Medical Directive and Asset Management Agreement. It was a deliberate attempt to hide the truth in boring legal language. "What is all this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I thought it was just for the insurance." "It is," Silas said quickly. "It is just standard paperwork. It allows me to talk to your doctors and pay the bills for the house. You know how confusing the bills get. You forgot to pay the electric bill last month, remember?" I hadn't forgotten. He had hidden the bill in the trash. But I nodded meekly. "I suppose so," I whispered. "It is just so much reading. My eyes aren't what they used to be." "You don't need to read it," Silas said, pushing the pen into my hand. "I already read it. It is fine. Just sign where the yellow stickers are." He pointed to a yellow tab at the bottom of the page. "Sign here." I took the pen. I held it loosely in my hand, letting the tip hover over the paper. My hand shook, creating a small ink blot on the signature line. "Oh dear," I said. "I am so clumsy today. Just sign it." "Martha," Silas snapped, losing his patience. "Just write your name." I took a deep breath. I looked at the paper. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. Not the old scratched pair I usually wore around him, but my good pair. The ones I used when I was auditing a Fortune 500 company. I put them on. I sat up straighter. I stopped shaking. "Actually, Silas," I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing the wobble entirely. "I think I will read it. My father always told me never to sign anything without reading the fine print." Silas froze. The change in my demeanor was subtle but instantaneous. The confused old woman had vanished. The forensic accountant had entered the room. He laughed nervously. "Aunt Martha, we don't have time for you to read 50 pages. I ignored him. I flipped the page. I scanned the text. My eyes darted across the paragraphs, picking out keywords. Irrevocable. Total asset liquidation. Power of attorney. I flipped to page 5. I pointed to a paragraph. "This is interesting," I said, my voice crisp and clear. Section 4, Clause B states that the power of attorney becomes effective immediately upon signature regardless of medical status. That contradicts what you just told me, Silas. You said it was for when I couldn't manage things. This says you take over today. Silas's face went pale. Mr. Finch shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It is boilerplate," Silas stammered. "It is standard language." I flipped to page 12, and here I continued running my finger down a column of numbers. "You have listed the value of the vineyard inventory at $50,000. Silas, do you really think I am that stupid? The 1972 reserve alone is valued at $2.5 million. If you declare this value to the IRS, that is tax fraud. That is a federal felony." The room went dead silent. Bella stopped drinking her smoothie. Silas stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The pen in his hand had stopped tapping. "Who did the valuation, Silas?" I asked, looking him dead in the eye. "Was it Mr. Kincaid, the developer who wants to bulldoze my house?" Silas stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "What are you talking about? Give me the pen." "You are confused. You are having an episode." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "I am not having an episode, Silas. I am having a realization. I realized that you are not only a thief, but you are a lazy one. You didn't even bother to check the math on page 10. You tried to depreciate the land value, which is impossible because land doesn't depreciate. You would know that if you had ever worked a real job in your life." Silas's face turned a violent shade of red. He slammed his hands on the table. "Enough!" he shouted. "You are signing those papers. I am trying to help you. You are old Martha. You are going to lose this place anyway. I am the only one who can save it." "Save it?" I asked. "Like you saved your nightclub? Like you saved the Oasis Project?" He recoiled as if I had slapped him. "How do you know about that?" "I know about everything, Silas," I said, standing up. "I know about the $400,000 you owe. I know about the liens. And I know about Tony." The name hung in the air like smoke. Silas looked terrified. He looked at Mr. Finch. "Get out," he hissed. Mr. Finch didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his briefcase and bolted for the door, leaving Silas alone with the monster he had poked. Silas looked back at me. His eyes were wide and desperate. "You hacked my computer," he whispered. "That is illegal." I took off my glasses and folded them neatly. "Sue me," I said, "but you will need a lawyer. And looking at your bank balance, Silas, you can't afford one." The silence that followed my declaration was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb that has finished ticking and is just taking that split-second breath before it detonates. Silas stared at me, and for the first time I saw the true face beneath the mask. It wasn't the face of a grieving nephew or a concerned family member. It was the face of a cornered animal. His eyes were wide and rimmed with red, and a vein in his forehead was throbbing in time with his racing heart. "You think this is a game?" Silas whispered. His voice was shaking, but not with sadness. It was shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. "You think you can just sit there in your knitting chair and play detective? You have no idea what you have done. You have no idea what you have started." I stood my ground. I didn't retreat. I gripped the back of the dining chair, my knuckles turning white, but I kept my voice steady. "I know exactly what I have done, Silas," I said. "I have stopped you from stealing my home. I have stopped you from erasing your uncle's legacy to pay for your mistakes." "Mistakes?" he screamed. The sound was so loud it made Bella jump and drop her phone on the floor. It shattered, but she didn't even look at it. "These aren't mistakes, Martha. This is life or death. Tony isn't a bank. He doesn't send late notices. He sends people to break your legs. If I don't have the deed by Friday, if I don't show him proof of collateral, I am a dead man." He took a step toward me. His hands were clenched into fists. "Do you hear me? You are killing me!" Bella let out a small whimper. She looked from Silas to me, her eyes wide with panic. She had signed up for a rich boyfriend with a vineyard. She hadn't signed up for mob debts and broken legs. "Silas," she stammered. "Who is Tony? You said it was just a business loan. You said it was venture capital." "Shut up, Bella," Silas roared, spinning around to face her. "Just shut up. You wanted the money, right? You wanted the lifestyle? Well, this is how the sausage is made." He turned back to me. His breathing was ragged. He looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically from the sideboard to the desk. to the antique cabinet in the corner. "Where is it?" he demanded. "Where is what, Silas?" I asked calmly. "The deed," he spat. "The physical deed. I know you have it. It's not in the filing cabinet." I looked. "It's not in the safe deposit box key I found in your purse. Where did you hide it?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him with pity. "Give it to me!" he screamed. He lunged at the sideboard. He ripped the drawers open, dumping the contents onto the floor. Silverware, napkins, and placemats crashed onto the wood. He kicked through the pile, looking for a thick envelope. Looking for the heavy paper with the gold seal. It wasn't there. He ran to the hallway. I heard the sound of the coat closet being torn apart. Coats were thrown to the floor. Boxes of winter gear were overturned. He was a tornado of destruction tearing through the orderly life I had built. I watched him. It broke my heart to see my home treated this way. To see the things Henry and I had cared for being trampled by greed. But I knew this was necessary. He had to break. He had to show Bella and the world who he really was. Bella backed into the corner of the dining room. She was shaking. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Silas, let's just go. Let's just leave. We can't leave." Silas yelled from the living room. He threw a vase against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. "We can't leave without the deed! If we leave with nothing, we are dead!" He came running back into the dining room. He looked deranged. His hair was wild, his tie was crooked, and he was sweating profusely. He marched up to me and grabbed my shoulders. His fingers dug into my flesh. "Tell me where it is, Martha," he hissed. "Tell me, or I swear to God, I will have you declared incompetent so fast your head will spin. I will put you in the cheapest state home I can find. I will leave you to rot in a room with no windows. Tell me!" I looked at his hands on my shoulders. I looked into his eyes. "Get your hands off me, Silas," I said. My voice was low and cold like steel. He didn't let go. He shook me. "Tell me!" "The sheriff is on his way." I lied. I pushed the panic button on the alarm system 5 minutes ago. It was a bluff. I didn't have a panic button. But Silas didn't know that. He looked at the keypad on the wall by the kitchen. The little red light was blinking. It was just the battery warning light, but to him, it looked like Judgment Day. He let go of me as if I were burning hot. He stumbled back. "You are lying," he said. "You are bluffing." "Am I?" I asked. "Do you want to stay and find out? Because if the sheriff comes here and sees you destroying my house and assaulting an old woman, you won't have to worry about Tony. You will be safe in a cell." Silas looked at the door. He looked at me. He looked at the ruin he had created. Then he ran for the stairs. "I have to find it," he muttered to himself. "It has to be upstairs, in the bedroom, under the mattress. Old people always hide things under the mattress." He thundered up the stairs. I heard the door to my bedroom, the sanctuary I had shared with Henry, slam open. I heard the sound of drawers being pulled out and dumped. I heard the mattress being flipped. Bella looked at me. She didn't look arrogant anymore. She looked like a child who had realized the carnival ride was broken and dangerous. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the danger." I looked at her. I didn't hate her. She was just a shallow girl who had made a bad bet. "Get out, Bella," I said softly. Take your car and drive. If you stay with him, you are going to go down with him. And he is going down hard." She didn't argue. She didn't ask about her luggage. She grabbed her purse and ran out the front door. I heard her car engine roar to life and the spray of gravel as she sped away, leaving Silas behind. Upstairs, the crashing stopped. There was a moment of silence. Then a howl of frustration echoed through the house. It was a raw animal sound. He hadn't found it. He had torn my bedroom apart. He had likely cut open the mattress. He had destroyed the last private space I had. But he hadn't found the deed, because the deed was sitting safely in a fireproof safe in Robert Henderson's office 5 miles away. I walked to the front door and opened it. The cool, damp air flowed in, cleansing the house of the smell of Silas's fear. I stood on the porch and waited. I knew what would happen next. He would come down. He would be exhausted. The adrenaline would crash, and that was when I would finish this. Silas stumbled out onto the porch a few minutes later. He looked like a man who had been through a war and lost. His shirt was torn at the shoulder from where he had snagged it on a closet hook, and his face was streaked with sweat and dust. He looked at the empty driveway where Bella's car had been, and then he looked at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She had abandoned him. He was alone. "Where did she go?" he croaked. His voice was raw. "I told you, Silas," I said, calmly leaning against the porch railing. "She made a smart business decision. She cut her losses. You should have done the same weeks ago." Silas slumped down onto the top step. He put his head in his hands. He looked so small. For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to visit in the summers, the one who used to chase fireflies in the jar. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I saw the flashing lights turning off the main road and coming up the long driveway. I didn't turn on the sirens because I asked him not to. Sheriff Dalton had been the sheriff here for 20 years. He and Henry used to fish together on Sundays. He knew this land, and he knew me. The cruiser crunched to a halt behind Silas's rental car. Silas jumped up, panic flaring in his eyes again. He smoothed his hair down frantically, trying to look like the respectable businessman he pretended to be. Sheriff Dalton stepped out. He was a big man with a slow walk and eyes that didn't miss a thing. He adjusted his hat and walked up the steps, thumb hooked in his belt. "Afternoon, Martha," he said, nodding to me. "Afternoon, Jim," I replied. "Sorry to drag you out here." Dalton looked at Silas. He looked at the torn shirt and the sweat. He looked through the open front door at the overturned furniture in the hallway. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. "Who is this?" he asked, pointing a gloved finger at Silas. "I am Silas Galloway," Silas said, stepping forward and extending a hand. "I am her nephew. I am here taking care of her. We had a little accident inside. Aunt Martha had a fall, and I was just moving some furniture to help her. She is a bit confused, you know. Dementia. It is very sad." Silas was trying to spin the narrative. He was trying to use the senile old lady card one last time. Sheriff Dalton didn't shake his hand. He just looked at it until Silas slowly lowered it. "I have known Martha since before you were born. Son," Dalton said, his voice deep and rumbling, "and I had breakfast with her at the diner last Tuesday. She beat me at the crossword puzzle in ink. She isn't confused." Silas opened his mouth to argue, but Dalton cut him off. "Now Martha says you have been tearing up the house, says you are looking for a deed." Silas went pale. "It is a civil matter." he stammered. "It is a family dispute. You have no jurisdiction here, Sheriff." Dalton stepped closer. He towered over Silas. "Destruction of property is a criminal matter, son. Elder abuse is a criminal matter. And if I go inside and find bruises on her, I am going to put you in the back of that car and we are going to have a very long talk at the station." Silas took a step back. "I didn't touch her. I swear. I need the deed. I have a deal. I have investors." That was the moment I chose to speak. "There is no deal, Silas," I said softly. He whipped his head around to look at me. "What? There is no deal," I repeated. "Even if you found the deed, even if you forged my signature, even if you dragged me to a lawyer and forced my hand, you can't sell the vineyard." "Why not?" he demanded. "Because I don't own it," I said. Silas stared at me. His brain was trying to process the words, but they weren't making sense. "What do you mean you don't own it?" I walked over to him. "I transferred the ownership this morning, Silas. The Galloway Vineyard is now the property of the Martha Galloway Heritage Trust." "And do you know who the beneficiary is?" He shook his head slowly. "The Oregon State Conservation Fund." I lied. It wasn't a lie, really. That was the ultimate plan in my will. But for now, it was enough to crush him. "The land is protected," I said. "It can never be developed. It can never be subdivided. And it certainly can never be turned into condos. The moment you signed that letter of intent with Kincaid and Thorne, you committed fraud, Silas. You sold them something that doesn't exist. You took a deposit, I assume?" Silas turned a sickly shade of gray. "50,000, he whispered. "I took a $50,000 deposit. I spent it. I sent it to Tony as a good faith payment." I nodded slowly. "So you took $50,000 from developers for land you can't sell, and you gave it to a loan shark for a debt you can't pay." Sheriff Dalton let out a low whistle. "Sounds like you are in a heap of trouble, son. That is wire fraud. That is grand larceny." Silas looked at the sheriff, and then he looked at me. The realization washed over him. He wasn't just broke. He was a criminal. And worse, he had crossed powerful men on both sides of the law. "Please, Aunt Martha," he begged, falling to his knees. His pride was gone. "Please, you have to help me. Undo the trust. Sign the papers. Kincaid will kill me. Tony will kill me. You can't let them kill me." I looked down at him. I remembered the way he had looked at my house yesterday, planning to bulldoze it. I remembered the way he had gaslighted me, making me doubt my own mind. "I can't help you, Silas," I said. "You made your bed." Sheriff Dalton stepped forward and put a hand on Silas's shoulder. It wasn't a comforting gesture. It was the grip of the law. "I think you better come with me, son," Dalton said. "I can't arrest you for the fraud yet, not until the developers file a complaint. But I can sure as hell arrest you for the damage to this house. And honestly, considering who is going to be looking for you, a jail cell might be the safest place for you to be tonight." Silas didn't fight. He didn't argue. He just wept. He let Sheriff Dalton lead him down the steps and into the back of the cruiser. He looked like a child who wanted his mother, but his mother wasn't here. And his aunt was done cleaning up his messes. I watched the cruiser back down the driveway. I watched the red taillights disappear around the bend. I was alone again. The house was a wreck. My bedroom was destroyed, but the vineyard was safe. The silence returned to the valley, but this time it wasn't the silence of grief. It was the silence of victory. The sun rose the next morning on a house that looked like a battlefield. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation with Silas and the sheriff had faded, leaving behind a deep ache in my bones. My shoulder throbbed where the tension had held it tight, and my hands were stiff. But I did not rest. I could not rest until every trace of the invasion was gone. I started in the dining room. I picked up the overturned chair and ran my hand over the scratches in the wood floor. They were scars, but wood can be refinished. I swept up the shards of the shattered vase. It was just a vase. It was just a thing. Things could be replaced, but peace of mind was priceless, and I had mine back. I moved to the guest room. The air still smelled of him, that cloying mix of expensive cologne and anxiety. His clothes were everywhere. Silk shirts thrown on the floor, designer jeans draped over the lamp. I didn't fold them. I didn't treat them with care. I grabbed a black heavy-duty trash bag from under the sink, and I started shoveling. I grabbed the suits that cost $2,000 and stuffed them into the plastic. I threw in the Italian loafers without checking to see if they were paired. I cleared the bathroom counter, swiping his expensive creams and hair gels into the bag with a single motion of my arm. It felt cathartic. It felt like I was exorcising a demon, one toiletry item at a time. I dragged the bags, 3 of them in total, down the stairs. They thumped heavily against the steps, a dull sound that echoed in the empty house. I dragged them out the front door and across the porch. It had started to drizzle again, a cold, gray Oregon rain. I left the bags right there at the edge of the steps where the rain would soak into them. They looked like trash, and that is exactly what they were. Just as I turned to go back inside, I heard a car engine. It was an aggressive roar. A silver SUV tore up the driveway, spraying mud and gravel. It screeched to a halt right behind my truck. It was Mr. Kincaid, the developer. He jumped out of the car before the engine had even stopped turning over. He was wearing a trench coat, and he looked furious. He stormed up the steps, his face a mask of red indignation. "Where is he?" Kincaid shouted. "He didn't even say hello. Where is that lying little weasel?" I stood in the doorway, blocking his path. I crossed my arms over my chest. "If you are looking for Silas," I said calmly, "he is currently a guest of the county jail. I believe visiting hours are on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Kincaid stopped halfway up the steps. He stared at me. "Jail? What for?" "Destruction of property," I said, "and likely fraud. Which brings me to you, Mr. Kincaid." He narrowed his eyes. "Me? I am a victim here, Mrs. Galloway. I gave that boy a deposit. We have a contract. I have a demolition crew scheduled for next week. If he is in jail, you need to honor the deal. You are the owner." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Mr. Kincaid, you are a businessman, aren't you? A visionary, you called yourself." "I am," he snapped. "Then you should know better than to sign a contract with someone who doesn't hold the title," I said. "Silas never owned this land. I owned it. And as of yesterday, a trust owns it, and I can assure you the trust has no interest in condos." Kincaid's face turned purple. He took a step up. "Now listen here, you old hag. We have a deal. I have lawyers who will tie you up in court until you are dead. I will bleed this estate dry. I will take this land one way or another." I didn't flinch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Mr. Kincaid," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are currently trespassing. I am recording this conversation, and I have already sent a copy of your letter of intent to the State Attorney General. I think they will be very interested to see how you tried to bypass zoning laws by bribing a county official. You mentioned that at dinner, remember? Something about the zoning commissioner being a cheap date?" Kincaid froze. The color drained from his face instantly. He looked at the phone in my hand like it was a loaded weapon. You wouldn't," he stammered. "I would," I said, "and I will, unless you get in your car and drive away. If I ever see you or your partner on this road again, I will release the recording. I will ruin your reputation before you can lay a single brick." He stood there for a long moment, weighing his options. He looked at the frail old woman standing in the doorway, and he realized he had made a terrible calculation. He realized that the steel in my spine was stronger than the rebar in his condos. He didn't say another word. He turned around and walked back to his car. He didn't run, but he walked fast. He got in, reversed violently, and sped away down the drive. I watched him go. The last vulture had been driven off the carcass. I looked down at the black trash bags on the porch. The rain was coming down harder now, pooling on the plastic. Silas's expensive suits were getting soaked. I went back inside and walked to the kitchen table. I took a piece of paper and a pen. I wrote a single line. Eviction notice. Service rendered. I walked back out and taped the note to the wet plastic bag. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold, wet air. The house was quiet. The land was quiet. The only sound was the rain on the roof and the beating of my own heart, strong and steady. I was alone, and it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. It has been 6 months since the day the sheriff took Silas away in the back of his cruiser. The seasons have turned, and the cold gray rain of that winter has given way to the golden warmth of an Oregon summer. The vineyard looks different now. It looks alive. I hired a new manager, a young man named David, who actually has a degree in viticulture and hands that are rough from work, not manicured for show. He treats the vines with respect. He treats me with respect. He asks my opinion on the harvest schedule, and he listens when I talk about the soil patterns Henry and I mapped out 40 years ago. We are expecting a bumper crop this year. The grapes are small and dark and sweet, just like they were in 1972. I haven't heard much from Silas. The lawyers tell me he took a plea deal. The fraud charges were serious, and Mr. Kincaid testified against him to save his own skin. Silas is currently serving 18 months in a minimum security facility 2 counties over. He writes me letters sometimes. I see the envelopes in the mailbox with his shaky handwriting. I don't open them. I put them in a box in the attic. Maybe one day I will read them, but not today. Today is too beautiful to waste on regrets. As for Bella, I heard she moved back to the city. I heard she found another boyfriend, a stockbroker this time. I wish him luck. He is going to need it. Tonight the air is cooling down, and there is a hint of autumn in the breeze. It is the perfect night for a fire. I built one in the stone hearth, the crackling of the dry oak logs filling the silence of the living room. It isn't a lonely silence anymore. It is a peaceful silence. It is the sound of a home that has been defended and reclaimed. I walked to the kitchen and opened the pantry door. I no longer have to hide the entrance to the subcellar. I climbed down the ladder and walked to the back rack. The dust was still thick on the bottles. I ran my finger along the neck of one of the 1972 Pinot Noir. I pulled it out. The cork was old and fragile, so I used the special 2-pronged opener Henry taught me to use. I carried the bottle upstairs and let it breathe on the mantelpiece for an hour. When I finally poured it into the glass, the liquid was a deep brick red, almost brown at the edges. It smelled of dried cherries and leather and tobacco. It smelled like the past. I sat in Henry's old leather chair, the one Bella wanted to throw away. It is still the most comfortable seat in the house. I took a sip. The wine was perfect. It was complex and rich, and it lingered on the tongue. It tasted like victory. I looked out the window at the moon rising over the vines. I thought about the developers and their bulldozers. I thought about Silas and his greed. They had looked at an old woman and seen a victim. They had seen someone weak. They didn't realize that old women are the toughest creatures on earth. We have survived childbirth and heartbreak and loss. We have buried our husbands and raised our children. We are not made of glass. We are made of iron, wrapped in velvet. I raised my glass to the empty room. To you, Henry, I whispered, and to the legacy. I drank the wine, slowly savoring every drop. I am Martha Galloway. I am the keeper of this land, and I am not going anywhere. So that is my story. I would love to hear what you think. Do you think I was too harsh on my nephew, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe in justice, please subscribe to Silver Fox Legacy. Until next time.